When I made my first needle book, I had no idea how much I was actually going to enjoy using them. Honestly, I have a few of them that I keep in rotation, and sometimes I'll have a couple of projects going at a time, so it's nice to have more than one. And they're really super fun to make up in seasonal things to keep in line with your seasonal projects and that kind of thing. So I thought I would show you this one that I'm using and how I like to use it and set it up, and then we'll get into making our own needle books. So the first thing that I like to do is keep my needles in a piece of fabric that I have stitched onto the front of the first page of my felt. You'll see that I keep my scissors in this front pocket. And then I will keep the cut pieces of floss that I am pulling strands from here on these middle 2 pages. Sometimes it's neater than this. Most of the time it looks just like this. And then on the back page is where I will keep the scraps that I am ready to throw away. A lot of times when I'm stitching, I'm out at a sporting game or swimming lessons or wherever I am on the road, and I don't necessarily have immediate access to a garbage. So it's nice to be able to stick just those extra bits of felt and thread and things here, and then they're not stuck to me. And then obviously you have an extra little pocket over here you can use for pattern pieces or whatever it is that you might need to use to store. So like I said, I have loved using mine, and I think you will love using yours. So let's get started making one. The first thing that we're going to need to do is cut out all of our fabric pieces. You are going to need a batting piece for the middle of your exterior. You're going to need 2 pieces for your pocket. One will become the lining of the pocket and also the trim on the top. The other will be the front piece of your pocket. And then you will need an inside and an outside for your cover. You'll also need 2 pieces for your tab to close. If you want to have a different type of closure, so if you don't have a snap like this, I'm going to walk you through how to either add just a couple of pieces of ribbon to tie it shut, or to add a button and a little loop of elastic as another alternative for a closure. I love the finished look of this tab with the cam snap, and they are so easy to use. I will show you at the end how to insert the snaps here. And I will actually have a link to purchase the set to do that if that's something that you want to do, but I will also show you alternatives. So if you are using an alternative method to close it, obviously you won't need your tab pieces. Another thing that I wanted to point out is that there are multiple ways to create the cover. Now, the simplest way is for sure to just use a simple single piece of fabric. But there are a couple of other fun ways to do it. One is to use up small pieces of fabric scraps to create kind of a quilt as you go front to it that is just sewn directly onto the batting and the backing piece. Or another way is to piece together a front. In this case, I have used strips of fabric to create the front. And that is another really fun way to just customize your needle book cover. And I will have the measurements for these, how to make a striped version in the pattern itself. So the first step is to create your cover for your quilt. You will take your lining piece, and this will become the inside of your needle book, and you're going to put it wrong side up, and then you will add your batting, and then your front piece. This will become the exterior of your needle book. So you'll want to add quilting lines to this. You can baste it together using basting spray. You could use a glue stick because they're really small pieces. And then you'll want to add some quilting to finish it and stick these 2 edges together however you want. You could add just a few rows of quilting. You could add a lot of quilting. I have even added a little bit of hand stitching to some of them. There's a lot of different ways that you can customize this. Once you have your quilting done, it's going to look like this. And we are going to trim this down to the size indicated in the pattern. Now you want to make sure that you are using a ruler to create straight edges on this. And you want to make sure that you have gotten your backing, your lining and your front are all covering so that you don't have any gaps in your fabric. So I am just going to create my first straight edge, and then I will turn it around. I like to use the guides on my cutting mat to help me measure and make sure that I am keeping everything straight. And then you just trim it up to the correct size that's indicated in the pattern. Then we're going to, once you have this all trimmed up, if you want to add any embellishments, for instance, I have the buttons on this. I have added felt embellishments or little handmade tags, different things like that. So if you want to add an embellishment, after you've trimmed this up, then position it where you want to. You want to keep in mind that you will be adding binding to this, so you will need to account for a 1/4 inch seam allowance for your binding. And then you'll also want to just keep in mind that you actually fold this in half, which seems, you know, like an obvious thing to say, but I can't tell you how many times that I have positioned something thinking that it would look good and stuff, and then once I fold it in half, it's a little closer to the middle than I wanted if I wanted it to kind of be in this corner, or I wanted to center it on the top and it's off because I didn't, you know, fold it in half. So if you are going to do, you know, something that you want centered or whatever, a helpful tip is to just go ahead and fold it, position your embellishment, and then attach it to make sure that it is going to land right where you want it to on your final project. So once it's trimmed and you've added your embellishment, now we're going to start making our pocket. So like I said, you're going to have 2 different pieces here, and they are 2 different heights, but they are the same width. So what you'll want to do is turn them over and line up one long edge. Now, if you were using any kind of directional fabric for this piece, this is going to be your front. So you want your front right side up. And then this will be your lining and also the trim on the top of your pocket. And so you'll want to sew the bottom of this one to the top of this one. Again, these are not really directional, so it doesn't matter. But if you have a directional fabric, you want the top of the front facing shorter fabric piece lined up with the bottom of the lining accent piece to make sure that all the directions are going the right way. So you'll line up that long edge, and then you're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance right along that edge. So you can see I have these 2 sewn together. What I like to do is on my lining side, I will press this seam, and then I'm going to open it up, pressing my seam allowance towards this lining fabric. Once I have that pressed, then I'm going to fold it in half, bringing these 2 long edges together. And you can see how that creates a nice little accent strip on top of your pocket. Press that really well, and then I like to sew just an edge stitch across the that seam right there. And you can do one right where the 2 pieces come together, or you could do 2, one about 1/8 of an inch from the bottom and 1/8 of an inch from the top, just to add a little accent there. It's really just for looks. It doesn't serve any structural purpose. Once you have your lining, your pocket sewn together, we are going to attach it to our quilted cover. To attach our pocket, you're going to place your quilted cover for your needle book with the lining side facing up. So this is going to be the exterior of it. This is the lining. And then you are going to take your pocket and you'll line it up with the bottom edge and the 2 sides. Make sure it's nice and centered. And then I like to make sure that it gets pinned into place, especially on these edges of the pockets. Then you'll take it to your sewing machine and baste around the edge at about 1/8 of an inch, just to hold that pocket securely in place. The next step is to add the binding, and I have a whole video series on adding binding to small projects like this if you need help with adding the binding. I will note that at this point, if you are deciding to use a different closure other than the tab, you will want to add it here. I I should clarify that. You may want to add it here. If you are going to do a ribbon closure, if you attach it here where you are sewing it to the outside of your binding, you will place your first piece on one side and your second piece on the other side, and that will be on these two short edges. And you can decide if you want to have that ribbon going from the outside so that your ribbon ties will be kind of on the outside of your needle book or on the inside. I recommend that you do it on the outside only because the machine stitches are going to be a lot closer and tighter, and I like to hand stitch the binding onto this needle book. But you can for sure add it in there and just add a few reinforcing stitches to your ribbons if you are going to do that. If your ribbons are attached to the inside, then your little closure will be kind of tucked more inside of that seam or that binding that you see here. The other option is if you are going to add a button here and add a loop of elastic, you'll probably want to add that loop of elastic to the outside. So once my pocket is in place, I'm going to add the binding first to the outside of my project. That way you get a really clean finished edge to your binding. So if you are going to add your ribbons, you will do one on each short side here. If you are going to add an elastic loop to add to a button, then you will put it on the left side with your quilted exterior facing up. So I have my pocket here. This is my bottom of my project, and you'll want to put your elastic loop here. You will position it so that the two ends line up with your raw edge here and the loop faces towards the middle of your project. And then you'll go ahead and add your binding on top of that, sewing and securing those loops into place or the edges of your ribbon. A couple of tips if you are using ribbon is to make sure that you seal the end of your ribbon either with heat, if there's any kind of polyester or acrylic into it that you can kind of melt and seal the edge. If it's a cotton ribbon, you may want to use fray check or some other means of making sure that that ribbon isn't going to fray. As you're tying and untying your needle book closed, you want to make sure that those ribbons or the elastic stay securely in place. So once you've added your binding and sewn it down all the way around, then like I said, I like to hand stitch my binding onto the inside of my project. One other hint and tip as you're sewing your binding around is that your pocket is on the other side and it's loose in the middle, obviously on purpose. But as you're sewing and coming down this edge here, your binding or your pocket may fold under or get caught. So just make sure that you're paying attention to the edges of your pockets as you're sewing your binding, especially on this right side as you go, because that pocket tends to kind of catch, and at least it does on my sewing machine. So make sure you're paying attention to that as you're sewing down your binding. All right, so now we have our binding all attached, hand sewn down, ready to go. Now we're gonna add our felt page. So you're gonna cut your piece of felt to the size that it indicates in the pattern. And then I don't have specific sizes for these extra little embellishments because most of the time I'm just using scraps. So this particular piece is 2 inches by 3 inches, but you can for sure add a bunch of different sizes to that. In this one, I've actually added 2 different pieces here just to add a little bit more interest and color. So use whatever scraps you have. You're going to take 2 pieces of your fabric, sew them right sides together, leave an opening for turning, clip your corners, press, and then attach it to your felt. And it doesn't matter that you can see the stitches through on this side because this is just where we're storing extra threads anyway. So just make sure that you get any embellishments or anything that you want to add attached at this point. And then you are going to center it onto your needle book. You'll want to have your embellished page sitting face down so that then it becomes the first page in your book. And then you will just sew down the center. Now, one way that I like to both line it up and get the center sewn is I will fold my page in half and I will try to crease it really well using my fingers to press it to create a crease. And then I will do the same thing with my needle book, folding it in half and making sure that those edges get creased really well. so that I have a nice mark on the inside of my book to use to line up that center there. And then again, I will just stick a couple of pins in this to keep my page from shifting. And then I will sew right along that creased mark. If you have a hard time seeing that creased mark, you can totally use like a water soluble marking pen to mark it on there to make sure that you're getting a straight line. You will want to backstitch at the beginning and ending of your felt page just to secure it. And then once that's in place, the last step is to prepare our tab for closure and finish up our needle book. One tip that I do have is I do have a pair of scissors. So this pair of scissors that I use has a little bit of a plastic handle and stuff, and it stays put pretty well. I have another pair of scissors that are heavy and metal and very slippery, and they really like to slide out of the pocket here. So if you have a piece of ribbon or something like that, you can tack it to the inside of your needle book to create a tie to secure your scissors into place if that is something that you are running into a problem with. And you can do that now, or you can do it, you know, down the road if you find that you're having problems. What I would do is just stitch right through this lining fabric, maybe catch a little bit of the batting if you can, but don't stitch through all the way to the front. Otherwise you'll see those stitches on the front. But just secure a little bit of ribbon there that you can tie it down. You could add a little bit of elastic or something so that you can just slip your scissors in there and hold them a little bit more securely in here. Really just is going to depend on the kind of scissors that you have. So let's get to making our tab. In the pattern is a pattern piece for the tab template. What you're going to do is take your 2 pieces of tab fabric and you're going to center your pattern piece onto that fabric. Then you will trace around it using you can use any kind of marking tool. If you are nervous about the ink showing through, then use a water soluble or an air soluble marking pen. I just use a regular ballpoint pen. You could use a mechanical pencil as well. And you'll want to trace all the way around it. And if you need to remind yourself to leave an opening, you can go ahead and add a couple of little marks where these marks are on the pattern to make sure that that is that you're remembering to leave that open. Now you're going to sew around the pattern on the printed, the traced line. Now, if you have an older version of this pattern, then it will have a larger tab version, and it will tell you in the directions to use that tab, to use the pattern piece to round the corners and then sew it using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. But what I have found as I've been making this is sometimes it's really hard to maintain that 1/4 inch seam allowance as you're going around these rounded corners. And in order to get the corners to look even and just have a nice finished look to them, I have found it's a lot easier to just sew right on a traced line when I'm doing rounded corners. So I have modified the pattern, and if you are subscribed to my newsletter, it will be going out. If you are watching this video and you sign up to get this pattern, it will have the updated version with this smaller tab. So just make sure that if you have an older version of the pattern, that you're checking the size of your template to make sure it's not the bigger size of the tab. And it will say in the directions, you know, if it says to use the 1/4 inch seam allowance, you have the older version of the pattern. So you can either go ahead and just request the new pattern, or you can just follow those directions and you'll still come out with a great project. All right, so like I said, we're going to trace it and then we're going to sew right on that sewn line, or that drawn line. So I don't know if you can see these stitches because it's white and all of that stuff. But once you have done that, and make sure that you leave your opening and you backstitch at the beginning and ending of your stitches. This is a very small opening for turning, which I apologize for, but it's, you know, necessary sometimes to work with small pieces. Okay, once you have that done, we're going to clip our corners and clip our rounded corners. One tip that I have, as always for rounded corners, is I really like to use pinking shears for that. So I will just use my pinking shears and come up close to, but not through, my stitching right there. And I'm going to go ahead and just use this to trim a little bit of that extra seam allowance. It doesn't need to be quite so thick. And then I will use my regular straight scissors to go ahead and clip these corners. Then you're going to turn this right side out through the opening at the bottom, press it well, and then you'll top stitch around the whole piece using an edge stitch. Once you have that done, then it's time to add this to our needle book. Before we add our tab, the first thing we need to do is add the male end of our snap. On your pattern piece, there is a dot indicating where the snap will go. And so I just use a pin and kind of create a hole in my pattern piece. Then I'm going to line it up with my sewn piece. And I'm going to use a pen to just mark that dot where the snap will go. The next step in adding your snap is to pierce a hole. And if you get a set that has all of the pieces to set your snaps and everything, it will come with an awl, which is a very sharp tool here. And you're just going to use that to pierce right through your tab, both layers of fabric. Then you're going to take the cover end and it's going to go through that hole. And then you will take the male end. So I'm going to show you there's two different ends to this. One has a part that protrudes and the other has a part that receives. So the male end protrudes, the female end receives. So we're going to take the male end and we're going to slide it over the top of that post from our cover. And then this is the tool to set those snaps. And you just seat the cover into this cupped end here. And then you're just going to squeeze it together. And what that will do is it flattens the spike of the cap and it secures that inside of this end of the snap. So once you have the first end of your snap in place, then you're going to take it to your cover here, which I have right side down, right side up. So my pocket's here, and I'm going to center it onto the left side of my needle book here. And then I like to line up my sewn edge here with this edge of my binding. And then I will pin that in place, take it to my machine, and sew it down. Once it's sewn down, it's going to look just like that. I need to still put the snap on this one. Just walk through these steps really quick and get this on here because it's going to be easier to show you. Marking my spot. So if you have forgotten to add the snap like I did, you can go ahead and do it at this step. Add your cap. Add your female end. So I should point out that your cap, when you position this, is going to be facing up because this is going to wrap around to the front and that's going to be the outside that you see. So if you're putting this on after the fact, make sure that your cap is on the top. So now I have that in place and I have sewn my tab on. So what I'm going to do is fold my needle book in half, fold my tab over, and then I'm going to add some pressure right here. Sorry for the shaking, to the front to create an indent where I need the other end of my snap to go. So you'll want to do it fairly quickly. You've got a lot of layers here and that piece is going to disappear quickly. So what I'm going to do is put my awl right through where the center of that indentation is. Then on the other side, I want to pierce through just the cover, but not through the pocket fabric. So I've kind of pushed the pocket fabric to the side so that so that my awl is kind of poking all the way through. And that will create a hole all the way through my cover. Next, we're going to take the cover and we're going to slide it into the pocket. See if I can show you this here. So I see my hole right there and I'm going to put this flat end through here, and I want to make sure I'm not pinching any of the pocket fabric in that. and push that protruding end. You can see it right here. And then I'm going to put the receiving end of my snap on top. And then this part is a little finicky, not finicky, but just a little tricky. You gotta slide your setting tool and try to catch that, the snap in there, the flat end, and make sure that everything is still lined up. And then you will set the receiving end of your snap. And then once that's finished, then your needle book is done. So it may be helpful once it's finished to just give it a press with it all closed to help just create a flatter, more even finished needle book. But it's a pretty straightforward, easy project, one that is super fun and very useful. You can combine this with my simple pouch pattern, which is also a free pattern to newsletter subscribers. And then what I like to do, and I'm going to show you this whole set here, is I will combine my extra tall pouch, which is a version that you can find in my nesting travel pouch. And then I will add a simple zipper pouch and a needle book and create a stitching set. This would make an awesome gift for a super close stitchy friend. But it's really great for containing projects. The thing that's nice about this pouch is it has a D-ring here so that you can add a wrist strap. You could hang these from the D-ring so that you can keep them organized on a pegboard or on a wall. You keep the full skeins of the thread that you're using in your small zipper pouch, the working threads in your needle book, and then you have everything you need for your project. This extra tall zipper pouch holds up to an 8-inch embroidery hoop. So it's great for cross-stitching, embroidery, felt, applique, any kind of handwork that you're doing. You can keep everything together in this super great pouch. One thing I love to do with these pouches is you see here that I've used waxed canvas for the bottom. It helps it be a little bit water resistant and stain resistant. The other thing that makes it nice is then it also stands up on its own so that if I'm traveling, like I said, a lot of my hand stitching is done at games and sporting events and stuff like that. So it can stand up on its own. I don't have to lay the whole thing down. And then I can just add all of my project supplies inside it, and it's super awesome and ready to go. I will have the links to all of these patterns in the notes in the description for this episode. So I hope you have enjoyed our needle book project here. It's a really great way to combine your quilting, your piecing and sewing together. Maybe tackle those snaps if you've been nervous to do it. It's super fun and easy, and then you'll find yourself adding them to everything. As always, if you've enjoyed this video, I hope that you will like and subscribe to my channel. And until next time, happy sewing.